For 42 years, my world revolved around Michael. A life built brick by brick in our quiet home. But just a month after his death, strangers began calling, twisting his legacy, demanding urgent financial transfers I didn't understand, preying on my raw grief. They thought I was just a lost widow, easy to manipulate, but they didn't know the sharp girl who loved puzzles was about to awaken. Before we jump back in, don't forget to subscribe while you're listening, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, take a breath and listen closely. This is my story. The silence after Michael's death was the loudest, most crushing sound I'd ever known. Our sturdy brick home, Michael's pride with its sprawling rose garden, now felt hollow, a vast, echoing space. Every sunbeam cutting across the living room floor, every creak of the old wood, seemed to hum with an absence that was both visible and palpable. For 42 years, Michael and I had built a life here, brick by brick, memory by memory. He was my compass, my steady presence, the one who understood me better than anyone. Now, he was just gone. His armchair sat empty by the bay window, a book left face down on the cushion, a silent accusation against the abruptness of it all. His scent, once a comforting... I was barely a month into this raw, aching emptiness when the phone calls started. Insistent rings from numbers I didn't recognize, flashing on the caller ID like unwelcome ghosts. The first few times, I let them go to voicemail, too numb to answer, too exhausted to decipher the clipped professional messages that piled up. Then a letter arrived, crisp, formal, with a sleek embossed logo for Sterling Capital Group. It spoke of Michael's esteemed colleagues, of unfinished business and sensitive financial matters that demanded my immediate attention. My heart clenched. Michael had always handled our finances, quietly, efficiently. He'd told me, with that gentle smile, "You worry about the books and the garden, Susan. I'll take care of the rest." I barely knew where the checkbook was, let alone how to untangle complex business dealings. The voice on the other end, when I finally answered a persistent ring, was smooth as silk, brimming with manufactured sympathy. "Mrs. Turner? My deepest condolences on your profound loss. I'm Robert, a close associate of Michael's. He spoke so highly of you. He used words like legacy and urgent investments, speaking of Michael's foresight, his brilliance, implying a tight window to protect the family's future. His partner, Sarah, later joined a call, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine concern, mentioning a rare, final opportunity Michael had secured just before he passed. Her words twisted something deep in my gut, a bitter taste. They painted a vivid picture of Michael on the verge of something truly remarkable, something we, meaning me, needed to finalize quickly to avoid losing everything. It was a lot to take in when my mind was still reeling from funeral arrangements and fragmented memories. They spun elaborate tales of Michael's grand plans, his unyielding trust in them, and my vital role in ensuring his final wishes were honored. I felt like a puppet, my head nodding to phrases I barely understood. "The escrow requires immediate wire transfer," Robert would say, his voice firm, authoritative. "The portfolio needs rebalancing by close of business," Sarah would chime in, her voice hushed with urgency, adding to the pressure. Each conversation left me feeling more confused, more overwhelmed, and more isolated. My stomach was a tight knot, my head a perpetual fog, refusing to clear the financial jargon. Sleep offered no escape, only restless hours staring at the ceiling, replaying their confident words, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt cold and transactional, demanding decisions I wasn't equipped to make. They were kind, yet I felt a growing unease, a cold dread that clung to me like the scent of stale air. I was just a widow, lost and alone. Or so they thought. But deep down, buried under layers of grief, a flicker of something else began to stir. It was a memory of a sharp, curious girl who loved a good puzzle, who saw patterns where others saw chaos. Back then, I'd spend hours in my room, solving riddles, unraveling intricate knots of yarn just for the satisfaction of it. What Robert and Sarah didn't know was that girl, though older now and heartbroken, hadn't completely vanished. Her instincts, dormant for decades, began to prickle, hinting at a hidden discord in their polished narrative. Their perfect story had a crack in it, and as I sat there, sipping my lukewarm tea, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. I would press hard enough to find it. But what would I find at the heart of their perfect, deceptive tale? The lukewarm tea grew cold in my hand as I stared at the sterling Capital Group letter, a disquieting knot forming in my gut. Michael's study, usually a sanctuary of leather-bound books and warm lamplight, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing with unasked questions. I walked over to his large mahogany desk, the smooth surface cold beneath my fingertips. He had always kept it so organized, every pen in its place, every document filed precisely. It felt wrong, almost sacrilegious to disturb it. Yet, the unease that Robert and Sarah's calls had stirred was a prickle I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about money. It was about Michael, about his legacy. If these people were truly his trusted colleagues, why did their sincerity feel so manufactured? My gaze fell on a small, worn leather journal tucked beneath a stack of financial reports. It wasn't one of Michael's usual accounting ledgers. This one felt different, softer. I opened it, the pages brittle with age. Inside, in Michael's familiar, precise hand, were notes not of stocks or bonds, but of people. Names, dates, odd little symbols next to each entry. My heart skipped. This wasn't business. This felt like an investigation. Michael, my steady, predictable Michael, had always loved a good mystery novel. He'd often say, with a wink, "The best stories are the ones where you have to dig for the truth, Susan." Had he been digging? A chilling thought crept in. Could Robert and Sarah be connected to whatever Michael had been looking into? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent accusation. I picked up the phone. Robert had called twice that morning, leaving messages laced with an almost aggressive politeness. "Just checking in, Mrs. Turner. Time is of the essence regarding that transfer." Michael would have wanted us to act swiftly. I dialed his number. "Robert," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm still reviewing the documents you sent. There are a few things that confuse me." A beat of silence on his end. "Of course, Mrs. Turner. Take all the time you need. Though, as I mentioned, the window for this particular investment is quite narrow." His tone was smooth, but a faint undercurrent of impatience, like a ripple on still water, wasn't lost on me. "Perhaps Sarah could walk you through it? She's exceptionally good at explaining complex financial instruments." "That would be lovely," I replied, surprising myself with my composure. "Perhaps a video call? I find it easier to follow when I can see the documents myself." Another subtle pause. "A video call? Yes, that can certainly be arranged. Though, for security reasons, we prefer to keep sensitive discussions to phone or encrypted email. Perhaps an in-person meeting?" "Oh, I wouldn't want to inconvenience you," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "The video call would be just fine." When would be a good time for Sarah? I could almost hear his internal calculation. "Let me check her schedule. She's incredibly busy, as you can imagine, with Michael's affairs." He promised to call back. He didn't. Sarah called instead, her voice a little sharper than before. "Mrs. Turner, Robert mentioned your questions. We're concerned you might be delaying this crucial transfer. The fund Michael secured is highly time-sensitive." "I understand," I responded, my gaze fixed on a framed photo of Michael, his smile warm and genuine. "It's just that Michael was so meticulous. I'm trying to follow his lead. I've found some of his old notes, and I'm just trying to reconcile them with what you've sent. It was a fishing expedition, a test." Silence again. A longer one this time. "Old notes?" Sarah asked, her voice tight, betraying a flicker of something beyond concern. Michael kept everything so private. We're his official liaisons. There's no need for you to dig. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken warning. Oh, it's nothing major, I said, feigning casualness. Just his personal thoughts on some of the markets. It's just taking me a bit longer to connect the dots. The lie felt strange on my tongue, but necessary. Her unease was almost palpable now. Well, Sarah finally said, forcing a lighter tone, we want to make this as easy as possible for you. How about we just send someone to collect the signed documents and the transfer instructions tomorrow? It would save you the trouble. That's very kind, I said, but a quiet certainty had solidified in my chest. But I think I'll drop them off myself. It would be good to finally meet you both in person. Her hesitant, "Oh," was all the confirmation I needed. I hung up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy in my hand. The initial prickle of unease had sharpened into a cold, hard resolve. They didn't want me digging. They didn't want me to show up. And that, I realized, was exactly what I needed to do. Their reluctance was a beacon, guiding me toward the truth. The game, I understood, was just beginning. What secrets would their carefully constructed facade betray when I looked them in the eye, do you think? The Sterling Capital Group building rose, a sleek glass facade reflecting the morning sun, promising transparency it utterly lacked. My hands, steady now, gripped the steering wheel as I parked my modest sedan across the street. The name on the brass plaque gleamed, but a quiet suspicion, cultivated over days of rereading Michael's journal, buzzed beneath my skin. This wasn't just about Michael's unfinished business. It felt like stepping onto a stage where a performance was about to unfold. The lobby inside was polished marble and hushed tones, smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation. A young woman, impeccably dressed, sat behind a dark wood desk. Susan Turner, for Robert and Sarah, I stated, my voice clear, despite the faint tremor in my chest. She blinked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. They aren't expecting you, Mrs. Turner. My smile felt thin, stretched. Oh, but I'm sure they'll make an exception. It's about Michael's legacy, after all. The words hung in the air, a subtle challenge. She picked up the phone, her voice lowered, and I watched her eyes widen slightly as she listened. They'll be right out, she finally said, her tone suddenly hushed. Robert emerged first, his smile too wide, too quick. Sarah trailed behind him, a forced warmth in her eyes. Susan! What a surprise! Robert boomed, extending a hand that felt oddly soft, almost clammy. We were just about to call you back. Sarah's gaze darted around the lobby, a flash of irritation crossing her features before she smoothed it away. Yes, we were just finalizing a few things. So thoughtful of you to come all this way. They led me down a narrow, surprisingly unremarkable hallway. The esteemed colleagues, who spoke of Michael's grand visions, had an office that felt more like a temporary rental, lacking the lived-in feel of a long-established firm. No framed photos of smiling partners, no overflowing bookshelves, just generic art and silent, closed doors. We entered a small conference room. A single, large glass table dominated the space, barren save for a stack of brochures with the same sleek logo. Please, make yourself comfortable, Sarah gestured, her hand waving vaguely at the empty chairs. Robert leaned against the table, trying to appear relaxed. So, about those documents you mentioned, any specific concerns? He tried to draw me in, to control the narrative. I kept my gaze steady. Just a few details about the urgent investments Michael allegedly secured. He was so particular about his paperwork. I'm just trying to understand the urgency of these transfers. I watched them. Robert's eyes flickered to Sarah, a silent signal. Sarah cleared her throat. Michael was a visionary, Susan. Sometimes his plans moved faster than conventional timelines. This fund, for instance, it's a unique opportunity, highly time-sensitive. We're simply trying to honor his intentions. My eyes scanned the room. On a small credenza in the corner sat a generic silver-framed photo. It was a stock image of a skyline, Not a single personal touch. No photo of Michael. No group shot of colleagues. My gut tightened. "I understand," I said, a slow, deliberate cadence to my words. But Michael also had a very specific way of documenting his trusts. He kept meticulous records, often in a small leather journal. Robert flinched. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch around his eye. Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "His personal effects?" Sarah said, forcing a light laugh. "We wouldn't know anything about that, Susan. Our work was purely professional, top-level financials." "Of course," I replied, a quiet certainty settling deeper in my chest. My eyes met theirs, holding their gaze. They were good, practiced, but beneath the polished veneer, a subtle fear began to bleed through. They wanted me gone. They wanted the documents signed. And they certainly didn't want me asking about Michael's personal notes. The performance continued, a polite, tense ballet of evasions and feigned concern. I left 30 minutes later, the unsigned documents still in my bag, their forced farewells ringing in my ears. The silence of my car felt like a sanctuary after their strained pleasantries. I hadn't revealed my hand, but I had seen theirs. The fraud wasn't just about money. It was about erasing Michael's truth. And now, I knew exactly where to look next. How far would they go to keep their secrets buried, do you think? The silence of my car after leaving Sterling Capital Group felt like a deep exhale. But the air inside my home, later that afternoon, was thick with unspoken truths. I walked directly to Michael's study, the one room in the house I'd barely touched since his passing. His presence still lingered here, a faint scent of old paper and the pipe tobacco he sometimes indulged in. The world outside the window was fading to twilight, painting the room in long, soft shadows. I pulled the worn leather journal from beneath the financial reports on his desk. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted not with paper, but with secrets. I sat in Michael's leather chair, the familiar creak of the springs, a small comfort. The journal lay open on the desk. Each page was filled with his meticulous script, but it wasn't the usual financial shorthand. These were names, addresses, dates, and alongside them, cryptic notes. Willow Creek, denied. Silver Lake, contact established. Mount Zion, revisit. They read like coordinates to a hidden map, a life Michael had kept entirely separate from mine. He had always been private, a quiet man who kept his thoughts close. But this felt like a deliberate partitioning of his existence. My fingers traced the faded ink. On one page, a name jumped out. Robert Hayes, contact 217. The date was almost a year ago. Robert Hayes. Was this the Robert? The man from Sterling Capital Group? My breath hitched. Another entry just below it. Sarah Jenkins, follow-up 305. Sarah. Their names, nestled among these strange coded entries, turned my gut cold. They weren't just colleagues. This wasn't professional. Michael had been tracking them. Or perhaps they had been tracking him. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered then, a fleeting conversation over dinner months ago. Just some old loose ends, Michael had murmured, waving a dismissive hand when I'd asked about a late-night call. His eyes had flickered away, a rare evasion. I hadn't pressed, chalking it up to his private nature. Now, that memory tasted bitter, a seed of doubt finally blossoming into a chilling suspicion. I spent hours, guided by Michael's precise hand, sifting through his personal files. Old address books, dusty photo albums, even a box of letters from decades ago. I pulled out a magnifying glass, scrutinizing the small print, the faded handwriting. My own detective skills, honed by years of crosswords and puzzling over library mysteries, began to hum awake. "Look closer, Susan." Michael's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. The devil's in the details. In one album, tucked behind a sun-faded photo of Michael and me on our wedding day, I found a crumbling, sepia-toned picture. 3 young men, awkward in ill-fitting suits, stood beside an older, stern-faced man. One of the young men bore a striking resemblance to Michael. His eyes, the slight curve of his smile, but it wasn't him. It was close, too close, and the other two faces. I recognized a younger Robert, his grin a little too eager, and a hesitant Sarah, her eyes already holding that familiar wariness. The photo was marked on the back in an unfamiliar hand. The Hayes boys, summer 72. Hayes, Robert's last name. They weren't Sterling Capital associates. They were something else entirely. Family? Distant relations Michael never spoke of? My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a sophisticated fraud against a grieving widow. This was personal. Michael knew them. He had secrets, deep ones, that reached back decades. The unfinished business wasn't some investment. It was a history, buried under years of silence. The more I looked, the more the pieces clicked, forming a picture far more disturbing than I could have imagined. Michael hadn't just known these people. He had been intricately, perhaps tragically, involved with them. And their intentions, I realized with a growing dread, were far more complex than simple greed. What hidden betrayals, I wondered, did this tangled past hold, waiting to snare me in its unforgiving threads? The old photograph, faded with age, felt like a live wire in my hand, humming with an untold history that twisted Michael's memory into something unrecognizable. The Hayes boys, summer 72? The stark lettering on the back was a stark counterpoint to the polite fraud Robert and Sarah had attempted. They weren't strangers. They weren't simply colleagues. They were connected to Michael, bound by something that ran deeper than money, perhaps by blood itself. The thought sent a chill through me. How many secrets had Michael kept buried beneath his quiet demeanor? Secrets that now threatened to consume me. My hands, though steady, trembled faintly as I pulled out Michael's old family photo albums, stored in the cedar chest in the attic. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light, filtering through the small window. As I opened album after album, flipping past holidays, birthdays, vacations, I searched for faces, for clues, for any hint of a connection to the Hayes family, or to Robert and Sarah. My fingers brushed over grainy black and white images of Michael as a boy, a shy smile, serious eyes. No familiar strangers, no faces from that unsettling 72 photograph. It was as if this part of Michael's life, these Hayes boys, had been deliberately excised from our shared history. The phone rang, jarring me. It was Robert. His voice, once smooth, now had an edge of strained patience. "Mrs. Turner, we're still waiting on those documents. The deadline for the transfer is fast approaching. We wouldn't want you to miss out on this opportunity." "Opportunity?" I echoed, my voice cool. "Or obligation, Robert? I'm still trying to understand Michael's intentions. And frankly, your recent reluctance to meet in person raises questions." A sharp intake of breath on his end. "My dear Mrs. Turner, there's no reluctance. We simply respect your time. These matters are best handled efficiently." He was trying to regain control, to steer me back into their carefully constructed narrative, but I knew better. His urgency now felt less like a professional courtesy and more like a desperate scramble. "Indeed," I said, a deliberate pause. "And speaking of efficiency, I've been reviewing some of Michael's older documents. Some very old photographs, in fact. From 1972, if memory serves. They show a remarkable resemblance between you, Sarah, and Michael. Could you clarify that connection for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. A sudden, sharp void where his practiced composure had been. I could almost hear his mind racing, scrambling for a plausible lie. "Photographs?" he finally stammered, his voice thin. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Michael had many associates over the years." "Of course," I replied, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. "But not many from summer 72, I imagine. With the name Hayes Boys on the back." I pushed the knife deeper. "Seems quite specific, wouldn't you agree?" He coughed, a dry, nervous sound. "Look, Mrs. Turner, This is getting ridiculous. Our business is strictly professional. If you're going to delve into unrelated personal history, we can simply close this account and walk away. It would be a shame, given Michael's wishes, but Michael's wishes are precisely what I'm trying to uncover, Robert, I interrupted, my voice firm. And I suspect the truth of his wishes lies far beyond the documents you've provided. I'm not just looking for signatures. I'm looking for answers. And I have a feeling those answers are closer than you think. Perhaps even in this very house. I hung up, not waiting for his response. My heart hammered, a mix of fear and exhilarating clarity. He was rattled. The phone felt suddenly lighter in my hand, charged with a new power. I knew then, this wasn't just a fraud case. This was a family secret, a hidden history Michael had taken to his grave, and Robert and Sarah were desperate to keep it buried. My next move had to be precise, calculated. I needed to unearth Michael's past, and I knew exactly where to begin digging. What devastating truth, I wondered, had Michael hidden for so long? And how would its unraveling change everything I thought I knew about him? Robert's panicked silence on the phone was all the confirmation I needed. The truth wasn't buried in financial ledgers, but in Michael's own hidden past. The man I had loved, shared a life with for over 4 decades, was suddenly an enigma, his history fractured in ways I never imagined. My gaze swept over the familiar objects in our home, relics of a shared journey, now shadowed by an unsettling uncertainty. I had to find the roots of this deception, and I knew the oldest secrets often lay in the quietest, most forgotten places. I started in the attic, a dusty realm where memories slumbered in cardboard boxes stacked against sloped ceilings. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged paper and forgotten cedar. Sunlight, thin and pale, strained through a grimy window, illuminating dancing dust motes, making the quiet space feel ancient and solemn. Here, Michael kept remnants of his early life, things he rarely spoke of. Old school reports, boyhood drawings, a faded baseball glove, fragments of a self I barely knew. I worked slowly, deliberately, lifting lids, sifting through layers of yellowed newspaper used as packing. Underneath a collection of Michael's old college textbooks, in a box marked simply family photos, pre-us, I found it. Not a neatly organized album, but a loose stack of black and white photographs, their edges curled with time. Many were unfamiliar faces, distant relatives perhaps. But then, there it was. Another copy of the exact same sepia-toned picture I'd found earlier. The Hayes boys, summer '72. This time, however, a name was scrawled on the back in a different hand, a hand less formal than Michael's father, but undeniably linked. My cousins, Robert and Sarah, with Uncle Thomas. Cousins. The word landed in my mind like a physical blow. Not business associates, not strangers. Family. Robert Hayes, Sarah Jenkins, Michael's cousins. Why had he never spoken of them? Why had he kept this part of his life so completely separate, so thoroughly erased from our shared narrative? The polished confidence, the manufactured sympathy, the urgent calls. It all twisted into a much darker, more personal betrayal. This wasn't just a swindle. It was a violation of a deeper trust, a deliberate manipulation by people who knew Michael, who knew me. I found more. A faded legal document tucked within an old family Bible, outlining an early inheritance from a distant relative, a small parcel of land that was to be split between Michael and his 2 cousins, Robert and Sarah Hayes, children of Michael's deceased Uncle Thomas. But a later amendment, dated just weeks before Michael and I met, showed his portion significantly increased, the cousins' share drastically reduced, almost to nothing, due to their father's abandonment of family obligations. A profound sense of cold understanding washed over me. This was the wound. This was the story Michael had buried, the reason for their claim. My Michael, the honest, steady man I adored, had been complicit in a familial slight, a betrayal of his own flesh and blood. And now, That unaddressed grievance had festered, erupting years later into a calculated attack on me, the unsuspecting widow. The air in the attic suddenly felt thin, suffocating. I clutched the old photograph, its edges digging into my palm. My husband, the man I thought I knew completely, had carried this heavy secret, leaving me to face its bitter consequences. What other truths, I wondered, did his silence conceal, waiting to rise from the depths to demand their painful reckoning? The faded legal document from the attic, detailing Michael's altered inheritance, burned in my hands like a cruel indictment of his hidden life. Michael, my steadfast Michael, had knowingly deprived his own family. The anger that had fueled my investigation now tangled with a searing grief, not just for him, but for the lost years. The unspoken resentments that festered. Robert and Sarah weren't just fraudsters. They were desperate people, caught in a cycle born from a decades-old injustice. Their crude attempt at swindling me suddenly felt less like pure malice and more like a desperate, misguided attempt to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Could justice be so simple when betrayal wore so many faces? I spent a sleepless night, pacing the quiet hallways of a house that now felt full of ghosts and complicated truths. The smooth, practiced lies of Robert and Sarah replayed in my mind. But now I saw them through a different lens. The desperate pleas of Michael's impoverished cousins. Could I simply hand them over to the authorities, knowing the depth of their belief in Michael's betrayal? Michael had left me with a fortune, yes, but also with this profound, agonizing moral dilemma. He had woven a tapestry of silence, and now I was left to unravel its tangled threads, burdened by the weight of his unaddressed past. The next morning, the first rays of dawn painted the garden in soft gold. But I felt no peace. I needed counsel, not just legal, but moral. I called my old friend, Eleanor Vance, a retired lawyer whose wisdom I trusted more than anyone. Her voice, warm and steady, was a balm. "Susan, it's early. Everything all right?" "No, Eleanor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Nothing is all right. I need your help. It's about Michael and a secret he kept, a very old one." She listened without interruption as I laid out everything. The fraud attempt, my investigation, the attic revelations, the unearthed legal documents, and the damning photograph. The silence on the other end stretched, heavy with understanding. "So they're family," Eleanor finally murmured. "And they believe Michael cheated them out of their inheritance." "They do," I confirmed. "They truly believe they are the rightful heirs, that he unjustly disinherited them." Their actions, despicable as they were, stemmed from that deep-seated belief. They were trying to right what they saw as a wrong. My hands clenched. "What do I do, Eleanor? Do I pursue charges? Let them face the consequences of their fraud, even knowing this?" Eleanor sighed, a soft, compassionate sound. "Legally, Susan, their belief doesn't excuse the fraud. But in terms of justice, that's a different matter. You hold all the cards now. You could ruin them, yes. Or you could choose a different path. A different path." The words echoed in my mind, offering a glimpse of something beyond mere retribution. Michael's wealth, the very thing they sought to steal, could become a tool for healing, not just punishment. I looked out at the rose garden, a symbol of Michael's meticulous care, now needing a different kind of tending. I thought of Robert and Sarah, not as villains, but as fractured pieces of Michael's past. "What if," I began, my voice gaining strength, "what if I don't press charges? What if Michael's legacy becomes about mending, not breaking?" I explained my idea. A trust fund for Robert and Sarah's children, a quiet support, ensuring their education and a fresh start. Not as a reward for fraud, but as a balm for an old family wound. It was a bold choice, defying the satisfying simplicity of revenge. Eleanor didn't immediately agree, but I could hear her quiet respect. "That's a very generous, very Susan choice," she said. "But it's your money, your pain. Are you sure you're ready to make that kind of peace?" I took a deep breath. I'm sure Michael chose to bury this wound. I won't. It wouldn't be easy. There would be confusion, perhaps even resistance from Robert and Sarah. But this was my path. A profound sense of release settled over me, replacing the knot of dread. I wasn't just solving a puzzle. I was rewriting a legacy, beginning with an act of grace. But how? I wondered. Would those who sought to take everything react when offered a chance at something truly unexpected? How do you confront those who tried to steal everything? Not with anger, but with an offer of peace. The question echoed in my mind as I sat in Eleanor's understated, comforting office, the scent of old paper and quiet determination hanging in the air. Sunlight streamed through the tall window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. I had chosen this neutral ground, an environment of professional calm, knowing the conversation ahead would be anything but. Eleanor sat beside me, her presence a silent fortress, her gaze steady and unwavering. The old legal documents and the sepia-toned photograph of the Hayes boys rested on the polished mahogany table between us, silent witnesses to the tangled history about to unravel. A soft knock at the door, and then Robert and Sarah entered. Robert, impeccably dressed as always, strode in first, his smile a brittle mask, his eyes scanning the room, assessing. Sarah followed, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze avoiding mine, flicking instead to Eleanor, then to the floor. They chose the chairs opposite us, creating a distinct line in the room, a silent battle formation. The air thickened with unspoken tension. "Mrs. Turner," Robert began, his voice a shade too loud. "Thank you for finally agreeing to meet. We were beginning to think you'd simply ghosted us. We've been very patient about Michael's affairs." He still tried to project an air of injured professionalism, a subtle accusation in his tone. Sarah remained silent, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Indeed," I replied, my voice calm, belying the rapid beat of my heart. I looked directly at Robert, then to Sarah, ensuring my gaze held hers. "I did agree to meet, and I have much to say, not about Michael's affairs as you understand them, but about his true legacy." I paused, letting the words settle, watching for their reactions. Robert's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Sarah's head lifted, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment. A flicker of apprehension there. "I know who you are," I stated, my voice low, clear, cutting through the thin veneer of their carefully constructed identities. Robert's confident posture stiffened. Sarah visibly flinched, her hand dropping from her sleeve. "You're not just associates from Sterling Capital Group. You're Michael's cousins, Robert Hayes, Sarah Jenkins." The words hung in the air, sudden and sharp. Robert's face, usually so composed, fractured. His jaw tightened, a vein throbbing faintly at his temple. Sarah gasped, a small choked sound, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and DMM fear. What are you talking about?" Robert finally managed, though his voice was rough, stripped of its practiced smoothness. He glanced at Sarah, a silent, desperate question passing between them. "I'm talking about the truth," I continued, pushing the sepia photograph across the table. It slid to a stop directly in front of them. "Summer, 72. The Hayes boys, with Uncle Thomas. You, Robert. And you, Sarah. You're in it." Robert snatched the photo, his fingers trembling slightly as he stared at the faded image. Sarah leaned in, her face pale. Their eyes, once so guarded, now held a raw, exposed vulnerability. It was a shattering of their carefully crafted illusion, a revelation that laid bare the depth of their deception and their pain. "This is ridiculous," Robert mumbled, though his conviction was gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped look. "You're mistaken. We've never seen this before." It was a weak lie, a final, futile attempt at denial. "Don't insult my intelligence, Robert," I said, my voice unwavering. "I found this in Michael's personal effects, along with another document, one detailing an inheritance, a parcel of land meant for Michael and his two cousins, Robert and Sarah Hayes. And then, a later amendment, reducing your share to almost nothing, citing your father's abandonment of family obligations. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah let out a shaky breath, her eyes welling up. Robert, still clutching the photo, stared at the legal document I now slid across the table, his shoulders slumping. The carefully built facade of professional fraudsters collapsed, revealing the raw, wounded individuals beneath. He took it, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. He took everything. After our father. Michael promised. He promised he'd look out for us. He promised. Her words were a torrent of long-held grief and resentment, spilling out unchecked. That's why you did this, isn't it? I said, my voice softening, infused with a sorrow that was both mine and theirs. You believed you were simply reclaiming what was unjustly taken. You believed Michael had stolen your inheritance. Robert finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot, a flicker of defiance returning, mixed with profound shame. He left us with nothing, Mrs. Turner. Nothing. While he lived in this mansion, with his rose gardens and his fancy life, we struggled. We barely kept afloat. We deserved a share of what was ours. He slammed his fist softly on the table, the frustration and pain evident in his voice. He owed us. Eleanor gently placed a hand on my arm, a subtle reminder of the path I had chosen. I nodded, then looked at Robert and Sarah. Michael is gone, I said quietly, and I cannot change what he did. I cannot rewrite his past mistakes, but I can choose how to face them now, and I can choose how his legacy, the one I inherited, will be used. Their eyes, still brimming with pain and suspicion, fixed on me. They expected anger, accusations, threats of legal action. They were braced for a fight. You tried to swindle me, I continued, my voice firm now, though not unkind. You used my grief against me. That was wrong, but I understand why you did it. And I refuse to let Michael's unaddressed past continue to poison another generation. Robert's brow furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying, I looked from Robert to Sarah, that I'm not going to press charges. Their mouths parted, incredulous. Robert's eyes darted to Eleanor, then back to me, searching for a trick, a hidden clause. Sarah wiped furiously at her tears, her gaze fixed, disbelieving. I won't pretend what you did was right, I said, leaning forward slightly. But I also won't allow Michael's wrong to continue to haunt his family. His secret divided you all, and I refuse to be the one who makes that divide permanent by turning you over to the law. A silence descended, heavy and profound. The ticking of Eleanor's antique clock on the wall seemed unusually loud. Robert and Sarah exchanged a look, a shared moment of raw confusion, relief, and something akin to a fragile hope. What do you want? Robert finally asked, his voice barely a whisper, wary, expecting a catch. I want peace, I replied, my gaze unwavering. For Michael's memory, for my own heart, and for you. Michael left me with a substantial fortune. A fortune that includes the very portion that, perhaps, should have been yours. I took a deep breath. I want to create a trust fund. For your children, Robert. For Sarah's. For their education. For their future. It won't be a handout for your past actions, but a foundation for their future. A chance to break this generational cycle of bitterness and resentment. A way to finally right a deep wrong. Their faces were a study in disbelief. Sarah began to weep openly, quiet, racking sobs that shook her thin frame. Robert, usually so composed, looked utterly undone, his eyes welling up, a profound mix of shame, gratitude, and utter shock warring on his face. This wasn't the retribution they had braced for. This was an act of grace, an unexpected offer of healing where they had only known hurt. It will be managed by Eleanor, I explained, gesturing to my friend, who offered them a small, compassionate smile. Independent oversight. to ensure it's used for their benefit. And perhaps, I looked at them both, a tiny, hopeful smile touching my lips. Perhaps it will be the beginning of something new, a chance for our families to finally know peace, to heal what was broken. Robert nodded slowly, unable to speak, his gaze fixed on the table. The weight of years of resentment and the sudden lightness of unexpected mercy pressing down on him. Sarah, still crying, reached across the table, her hand hesitantly grasping mine. Her touch was warm, fragile, a silent plea for forgiveness, a glimmer of connection I hadn't thought possible. I had come seeking justice, armed with evidence and a fierce desire to protect what was mine. But in unearthing Michael's secrets, I had found a different kind of justice. One that wasn't about punishment, but about mending, about reconciliation, about choosing to sow seeds of grace where bitterness had once taken root. It was a path Michael himself had never dared to take, leaving me to face the consequences of his silence. But standing there, feeling Sarah's trembling hand in mine, knowing Michael's legacy would finally be used to heal rather than harm, I understood that true strength wasn't just in uncovering the truth, but in choosing what to do with it. My choice was to mend what Michael had broken, creating a new beginning from the ashes of old betrayals. And so, the quiet understanding settled between us. Not a victory, but a delicate, hard-won peace, woven from years of buried pain and a single, unexpected act of grace. What do you think about Susan's choice? Would you have done the same, or sought a different kind of justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more gripping stories like this. Your opinions truly matter to me.